we started the trumpet shell sound, and 4 or 5 measures into it, my lips just didn't work. I can't explain why to this day. I don't know what happened, but the muscles just failed me. I could not form an embouchure on my mouthpiece.
Welcome to another episode of Contrabass Conversations, your show covering life on the low end of the spectrum. I'm your host, Jason Heath, and I'm so glad to have you here today. Visit our site at contrabassconversations.com for all the details about what's going on here. And I love to hear from you. I love to hear people's stories. So reach out, send me an email at feedback@contrabassconversations.com. Today, I'm so thrilled to bring you this conversation with James Newcomb, who I feel is a kindred spirit of sorts in so many ways. James is a trumpet player, and he's the host of the Trumpet Dynamics podcast. He's also the host of the new MusicPreneur podcast, which officially launches on January 1st, 2017. By the way, that's the 10th anniversary of Contrabass Conversations. So James and I talk about that and all sorts of super geeky podcasting things. James recorded this, we both recorded this, and he put it out on his podcast a few weeks ago, and I think he called it Podcasters Be Podcastin', which is essentially what this is. So if you enjoy getting a behind-the-scenes look, which I've done several times in the past, at like what really goes on into making a podcast, this is a great way to get that. It's also a good way to hear about how two folks that are looking at this as a business, what we're both thinking about. So it's a very freewheeling conversation, very inside baseball. I guarantee you there are at least a few references that probably very few people will get, but that's how it goes, and we just had a great time chatting. I hope you enjoy it. We cover all sorts of valuable ground, so if you're trying to kind of do your own creative thing like I'm doing with this, I think you'll get a lot out of it. And I really like the ideas James has come up with for his Trumpet Dynamics podcast, which I find myself listening to way more than you'd think a bass player would want to listen to a trumpet podcast because of what he's doing inventively. And I'm super jazzed for his MusicPreneur show. He and I will also be doing an interview for his new podcast, so you can check that out. And I have a link in the show notes to my appearance on Trumpet Dynamics. I'd also like to thank D'Addario Strings for sponsoring Contrabass Conversations and let you know about their Zyx strings, which are multi-filament synthetic core. They've got a rich, colorful, gut-like tone. Great attack, great sustain for pizzicato playing, great bow response. They're made in New York, designed, engineered, and crafted at the D'Addario String Factory in New York. Thanks, guys, for sponsoring the podcast. And thank you to Rob Anzalotti of Bass Capos for providing hosting for Contrabass Conversations. And bass capos are an excellent choice for any bass player looking to implement a double bass extension. They're easy to install, easy to adjust, cheaper and more reliable than hand-built latches, also lighter and quicker in operation. And learn more at basscapos.com. Okay, here we go with our conversation featuring James Newcomb. Hey, how's it going, James?
Jason, how are you?
I'm good. I like your trumpet Skype logo. That's very good.
You got to keep people laughing while you're talking to them. Exactly. Because God knows I can't.
Right. Hey, I love that joke episode that you put out.
Thanks.
That was awesome. Great idea.
It's just something to shake things up.
Yeah.
I expected to get more feedback on it, more interaction with the audience.
Well, you never know, right? You never know what's gonna click and what's not. And then there's that whole the lurkers, like most of my audience, at least yours maybe too, and me with other podcasts. How many podcasts do I actually write into? Very few, and I'm a podcaster, right? Like I should be, right? And so I always try to keep that in mind, like in terms of feedback.
Oh yeah, do you listen to Michael O'Neill?
No.
He's got a podcast called Solopreneur. You might want to check it out. You might like it.
Yeah, I'll write that down. Michael.
He's actually a musician, drummer.
Oh, okay.
And John Dumas told me I should check him out, and I did, and I like it. I like Michael, and his tagline is, what is it? It's Solopreneur, job security for the unemployable.
Okay, nice. I like that. Cool.
Perfect. I mean, just tags that nabs that niche right there.
Yeah.
Just totally identify with it.
Yeah. Yeah. So are you out east? Are you out on the East Coast? Where are you at?
Raleigh, North Carolina.
Raleigh, North Carolina. I thought it was somewhere in North Carolina. I remember seeing some North Carolina symphony photos and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I think, right? Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Well, I'm on the opposite coast.
Yeah, I was born in San Francisco.
Were you really?
I was. I didn't grow up there, but my dad was in the Navy at the now closed Treasure Island.
Okay, yeah, sure.
And I was born at Letterman Army Hospital in the Presidio. Oh,
wow. Okay, yep. Excellent.
Which I guess now is some sort of tourist trap, or some sort of. It's not an active base anymore.
No, it's not. It was. I can't remember when that. I feel like it was maybe in the 90s that it got or started to get converted. But it's a pretty. But all the buildings are there. There's something similar in Chicago. There's this Fort Sheridan that used to be I think it was an army base, and they've turned it into, everybody's living in the barracks and that sort of thing.
Yeah,
so that's the Presidio, but it's just a gorgeous piece of property. And that Treasure Island is really cool too. My wife and I were just out there. They've got a couple of breweries on the island and a bunch of wineries, and you can sit there, and it's very industrial kind of feeling, right? But they've trucked in some sand, so it's a very weird feeling. You're sitting there like on a fake beach, but there are palm trees. But it's cool. It's cool. Hey, I'm excited for this. I'm glad we get a chance to chat, and I'm excited for the new podcast. And it's really cool that you did Podcaster's Paradise with John. Okay, and you're going to be on you're being interviewed tomorrow
5:20 Eastern.
All right, all right, excellent. What is that? What is that in Puerto Rican time? I wonder. Is it
same time zone?
Same time zone. Okay. Yeah. Nice. Well,
although I don't know if they do. I don't know if they do daylight savings.
Okay.
So if they don't, then they're an hour ahead.
Okay. Excellent. Well, I can't wait to check that out. That'll be cool. I'm sure it'll be in a month or so that it comes out. Or how does that work for John's show?
I think what we're trying to do is just work it around the launch of the podcast, which is the 1st of January. So
yeah.
I'll know more tomorrow.
Cool.
When it's going to release, but it's going to be around that time.
Nice. And you got some episodes banked. You got some content ready to go for 2017.
No, not yet. That's my big focus right now has been to finish the Trumpet Podcast.
Yeah.
And I've got, with a couple of exceptions, I have the rest of the year planned out. Mm-hmm. Now I'm just now starting to reach out to. I've had interest from 5 or 6 people.
Okay.
And what I'm going to do is just do, I think, 1 in-depth interview per week. Mm-hmm. And then the other 2 will be like a Q&A type of thing, or do something called like the 1-minute musician, where like a non-musician can just leave a message on the website and say, this is how music has impacted me. Yeah. Something like that. And then the 3rd episode of the week will be me giving my commentary, sort of an audio blog type of thing.
Okay, nice.
Yeah,
nice. Yeah, I see you're rocking the ATR. Is that what you got in front of you? The 2100, the Audio Technica.
It's great.
It sounds great. My USB connection died on my ATR, and I have all this.
Really?
I have all this. Yeah, but I've read that happens a lot. I was sort of surprised because it still works fine with the XLR. But I have an H6 and some mobile mics, and I just set up my SM58s, and I was like, you know what? This sounds as good as for my voice. It sounds as good, at least, as the ATR. So I've just been using a Shure for the last couple months.
No, you sound good too.
Well, thank you. And hey, I thought it was great. I mean, if you're down for, like, I am happy to release this like my end of it whenever's convenient for you. So if it would make more sense to like wait and like put it out like the week before your launch or launch, just let me know. Whatever I can do to like time it up for you. And I mean, I'll share whenever you put it out on your show, obviously. But yeah, are you up for the idea of just sort of like doing a, because it's so fun to like actually talk to another podcaster. Because sure. You and I your workflow is probably more similar to mine than just about anybody I ever talked to. And I don't know, I'm really excited about what you're doing just in terms of the entrepreneurial vision. And, that's a hot topic, obviously. Smart idea to make a show on that. And that's something that folks that listen to my podcast, I get a lot of good feedback whenever I feature something kind of in that realm. So
no, I mean, this is a good idea because you're not a trumpet player, and it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Because every Friday I do a feature on entrepreneurship.
Cool.
So,
all right,
why not just a couple of entrepreneurs talk entrepreneurship?
Nice. Why not? Indeed. Yeah. Cool, man. Right. How should we get this going, do you think?
I think we should just start talking.
Okay. Let's.
And then see what happens.
That's my favorite way to do these, right? Is like, I tell you, like more recently, I use Ecamm call recorder and it just goes, right? And I usually like sort of, I've quit being so formal with the beginning of my show because it kind of kicks the energy out of it can kick it off track sometimes, especially with somebody that's not like real comfortable behind a mic, which is most of my guests, right? And they kind of close up. They're like, oh, and now I'm on the air. Whereas like I've been just kind of yakking, and unless I'd say about half of the time, I don't know, sometimes I can tell that they want to have something formal at the beginning, but about at least half the time, I'm just kind of picky. I maybe don't put on the first few words we say, but I drop the needle on like minute 3 of our conversation, and it just feels really real.
Yeah, there's 500,000 podcasts out there and 500,001 ways to do it.
Right.
So
right. Yeah.
I listen to my share of podcasts, and they're all just a little different.
Yeah. Well, that's what's cool to me about the medium is it's just so flexible, right? I mean,
it is.
And it's cool to. Oh, and do you? Sorry, I'm jumping around all over the place, but I always go through and edit mine. I don't know if you do or not. I don't care if you edit me at all or not, but like I will edit you.
Oh, I'll edit you extensively.
Oh, okay.
No. When I started this show, it was so labor intensive. I would. I don't know if you heard like the first 20 or so episodes, but I would do 3 interviews per episode, right? And then I would have music, different music, every single episode, different opening music. The music had nothing to do with each other.
Yeah. And
it was so time intensive. I put so much time into editing. And I finally realized, you know what? People, they just want something real. You know, they want something they can relate to. And I was interviewing Aaron Ron Rom's son. And I just made that mistake again. And I was like, Ronald Rom. He's a founder of the Canadian Brass, right?
Okay, yeah.
And so I'm saying Ron Rom, and I said Rom. I just made this mistake. I just decided I'm just going to leave it in there.
Yeah.
Just leave the mistake in there. People like something that they can relate to.
Right. No, yeah. People want something honest and authentic and real, and it's okay to have some burps and hiccups and farts and stuff. That's all fine. Now you got to edit that. I mean sorry.
No, I mean you don't want it to be. I guess I was shooting for like the CBS Evening News, when I first started, but you don't want it to be like you're just hanging out in your closet talking trailer trash. You got to find that happy medium, because what, like trumpet players or you and your buddies in the bass section, you're not trying to be perfect with each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
You all are imperfect, and you all screw up every now and then. That's you want a podcast for your niche to be something that they can relate to. So that's one thing that I figured out. last 6 months or so.
Well, the thing I've thought about, and this is why I love talking to another podcaster, because like you and I probably have a lot of the same like silent pains and debates with ourselves about what to do and how to put it, And so one thing I do think is true, and I might be totally wrong, is I do think that the fact that I do edit, I think ultimately I'm getting better. I think that benefits me in two ways. One, I think I'm getting a better overall finished product. I mean, I really do cut out, and I edit way less than I used to. I used to make people sound like robots, where everything has the same, but and there are no ums or ahs. So it's like the art of taking out enough to keep it kind of flowing without sounding like weirdly speedy. So I do think that leads to a better product. And then also, like you, most of the people I'm interviewing, that's probably their first interview they've ever done. So they're very nervous. And the fact that I give them final edit and that I tell them this is totally not live, I think that gets people, they aren't nervous about that. And then the fact that I've never gone against that, in my 270 some episodes, I think that just makes people very willing to talk to me, even if they might be a little bit nervous. It's not a gotcha show. It's just reveal it. It's just like an in-depth talk. And the way I phrase it to my guests now is it's like what we would talk about over a coffee or a beer or whatever anyway, right? So I've gotten really away from scripted questions. So how do you approach like questioning people?
When I first started, John Dumas is he's my mentor. Like he's my teacher. Yeah. When it comes to podcasting, and I've spent time with him. I spent a day with him in Puerto Rico, and but I've learned more from him just sitting on his webinars, just watching. He's a master, he's one of the best. And so you can learn more from watching Bud Herseth play his scales than you can with 100 lessons with, your high school band director. Not to put down high school band directors, don't get me wrong. But when I first started, my first podcast was called Outside the Music Box. Yeah. And I just had these set questions, just like John Dumas has his interview flow, and he asks the same questions, and it's changed over time. But he's got a very specific format. He's got a very specific message that he wants to bring out, and that was how I modeled my beginning. These days, I honestly, I just say to the guest, I'm just going to ask you what got you started on the trumpet, and we're just going to go from there. Yeah. And that's how I phrase it. Yeah, I love that. And it's conversational. I view it. My job is to just keep it interesting, keep it flowing, find listen for that thing that can lead to that interesting rabbit trail. That little nugget that can try to find that door that they open that can lead to a nice, really in-depth conversation. Yeah. And that's the art of what we do, isn't it? That's like, it's such a hard, I tell people who ask about this sort of thing, it's like interviewing is both easy and the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, right? It takes like every skill, everything I know about music, everything I know about people, intense listen. And that's the trick is like, or it's not a trick, but that's what I do too. I'm like listening and I'm trying to see what excites them. You can sort of tell, right? And so sometimes I'll be talking to somebody and they're a bass player, but they start bringing up like composing, and I can tell that's their thing, right? So like that's the trail we go down. And what do you do when and like you probably, I have a lot of people that are nervous about appearing on something like this, and they ask for questions ahead of time. What do you do if someone asks? It's funny you should ask that, because just this morning, what is this, Monday the 14th, I just spoke to an older fellow, and it's a tribute episode to Zig Kanstul, a great trumpet manufacturer, just passed away, so it's sort of a tribute to him. And he said the very same thing, and what I told him was, I think it would be best if you were to pick out the topics to talk about. And he gave me a list of topics. And the interview went really, really well. Oh, I like very that. Well versed. Yeah. Yeah. I just said that in my attitude with a guest is, this isn't my show. I mean, I'm the host, and it's, my show, but this is your opportunity to shine. Mm-hmm. The spotlight is on you, and I'm just the one holding the spotlight.
Yeah.
And this is your moment. This is your moment to share with other trumpet players what you're about.
Yeah.
That's
a good way to phrase it. I like that. My line I always use is, my job is to make you look good, which usually ends up with laughter, but I like the way yours is a little more of a deep deep answer to that question. Yeah, I've been doing I have really been reluctant when someone asks me to send them I've got to try that strategy. What I've been doing is I write like two sentences and then another two sentences, and it's kind of like something I think is interesting about your life that maybe we could explore is this or that. But I've tried not to say blah 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 ? But back in the early days, like you were saying with your first podcast, I have my list of 30 questions that I would send everybody. It was like, questions for the double bass classical performer, questions for the double bass classical teacher, questions for the jazz performer, right? And it's like so scripted. And I never went down that list and asked, but I think like it's overwhelming to get a list like that if you're going to be a guest on something. And it starts to like script it out, and it loses the magic of what we're doing here, like actually having an honest conversation with somebody.
That's part of growing up as a podcaster.
Yeah.
It's when you start a podcast or any venture, musical or podcasting or whatever, you're going to grow up with it. Yeah. It's a baby, and it's going to grow, and you're going to grow right along with it.
So what attracted you to podcasting? Like, why podcasting?
It's interesting. 4 years ago, I was on a road trip. No, I'm sorry. It was three and a half years ago. We were on a road trip from North Carolina, where I was stationed at the time. We went to Tennessee, Colorado, Kansas, Iowa, Minnesota. Just a legit road trip, right? Mm-hmm. So we're listening to this audiobook, a John Grisham novel on audio that we got at the Cracker Barrel.
Yeah.
And we loved it. It was great to pass the time. And I remembered this novel that I had read earlier that year. It was called Higher Cause by a man named John Hunt. And I found him on Facebook and said, hey, is there an audio version of your book? I'd love to listen to it. Mm-hmm. And he responded, well, no, there's no audio version yet. I haven't got to that. And then I thought, why don't I do it for you?
Oh, okay. Okay.
So what I did was I sent him a little sample of the book, and he liked it, and I ended up doing the entire book for him. And we split the profits 50-50, all $25 of it.
Right.
But that was my in. That was I guess that was just me being the entrepreneur and saying, hey, I can do this.
Yeah.
Why not? And I sucked. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to say that I was a professional voice actor, but and then about a year later, I heard John Dumas on a podcast. He was a guest on a podcast that I listened to, and I heard the kind of money he was making, which is substantial. Mm-hmm. And I thought, man, if he can make that kind of money, that means that there's money to be made. And I don't know that I'll ever make that kind of money. I'm not going to rule it out, but if he's doing that, that shows that it's possible. So that's what got me in. That's what gave me the bug.
Yeah.
To do podcasting.
Okay. So
along with my disaster playing the trumpet shell sound in Korea.
Really?
Should I tell you that story?
Please do.
All right. Well, we all know we're all musicians, classical probably. So we all know the Hallelujah chorus.
Sure.
Or the from the Messiah. And I was hired. I played it for free, but I was asked to play the Messiah, which I'd always wanted to do. I'd never played it with an orchestra before. I'd played the trumpet shell sound a couple of times as a solo thing, but my first time playing the Messiah. And the first couple of pieces where the trumpet, which calls for a trumpet, go fine. Mm-hmm. And then it comes to the trumpet shell sound. And of course you're nervous. You want the whole audience is listening. This is in Seoul, Korea. It's a choir of expats. I think the U.S. ambassador to Korea, South Korea, was in attendance. Kind of a high pressure thing. And we started the trumpet shell sound, and 4 or 5 measures into it, my lips just didn't work. I can't explain why to this day. I don't know what happened, but the muscles just failed me. I could not form an embouchure on my mouthpiece. And throughout the whole piece, 4 or 5 minutes long, I just couldn't play. And like any trumpet player knows the feeling of getting tired, of getting fatigued. You take, you take a little break and then you get back in. Yeah. I couldn't do it. I would take a break. I could not get my muscles to form around the mouthpiece. And there I was, totally exposed. There was no other trumpet player to pick up the slack and play it. The trumpet didn't sound.
Oh, no.
And it was miserable.
Oh, man.
It was awful.
That's the opposite of what that song says you're supposed to do. The trumpet shell sound.
It was terrible.
Oh, wow. Yikes.
And there wasn't anything I could do. I couldn't just get up and walk out. I couldn't say, I'm sorry, I can't play. Can we start this over? No, I just had to sit there and just, it was humiliating.
That's a long number too. To go through that. That's not like a 30-second tune.
No, it's all trumpet and that baritone. Yeah. And it was awful.
Yeah. Oh,
miserable.
I feel for you. Yeah.
And the thing is, I wasn't tired. I had paced myself the week prior. I hadn't overplayed. I played enough to be in shape, but probably some sort of psychological thing where it's my first time doing it, and maybe I overplayed during the first 2 pieces, and then it just spiraled out of control. Yeah. But that's what woke me up. I was like, man, what if I were to never play trumpet again? What if I were to lose the ability? That was a wake-up call. And that was right before I joined Podcaster's Paradise, and that's sort of got me into it.
Yeah. Well, it's scary when you really think about it. And I've talked about this with other musicians, like how fragile we are as physical beings, right? Something happens with your chops, something happens with my fingers. I break a finger or something, or I develop and that's my livelihood. And that and perhaps teaching are how most musicians make an income. And I don't know about you, but I've gotten this question a lot going back. Cause like me, I started this podcast 10 years ago, right? Like early day, like dark ages of podcasting.
Yes.
Right. Like I would talk to somebody, hey, be on my show. And the question was, who are you? What's a podcast? And why should I be on it? Right. Which are all legitimate questions.
Yes.
Now I got the who are you? That one went away after a little while because I got some bigger name people in the bass world, and I'd already had a blog, and so as the social proof of having principal of the Boston Symphony, principal of the Cleveland Orchestra, big name soloists, that kind of thing, then they're like, oh, you're the guy who talks to those people. But still, like it was a challenge to get people to understand podcasting. It's been fun this last year. I got back into it. I rebooted it about just slightly more than a year ago. And for me, it was kind of looking at what I was doing, and I was moving out here to San Francisco and thinking, what do I want to do next? Because all my work's about to evaporate, right? I had an orchestra director job. I had regional orchestra gigs. I had a part-time university gig, but my wife got this position in San Francisco. And so how do I want to build my career again? Do I want to build it that way, or do I want to build it a different way? And for me, it was just kind of looking back at what I'd done over the years, and people kept talking about the podcast as something that influenced them. And then I started really looking around, and the landscape is just so different now than it was back in 2007 when I was starting it. And I just decided to try to go off on my own, take an entrepreneurial path, and center it around the podcast. And that it doesn't necessarily mean that all of my income comes directly from the podcast, but that's the core of what I do. I don't know how you feel about that, but that's like, it is. How do you see yourself and your business and how the podcast fits into that? I hope that's not too vague a question.
No. The podcast for me is a cornerstone to my business. Okay. It's like I expect a business, like a legitimate business, to grow out of this podcast, Trumpet Dynamics. Mm-hmm. And then the new podcast, MusicPreneur, there's going to be a separate business that that sprouts out from that. But the podcast is the primary means of marketing for me. Like when I started a year ago, this trumpet show, I was just out of the Army, and no one knew my name outside of a few friends of mine. I did not have any name recognition as far as someone who had any authority whatsoever in the trumpet community. And now I'm not going to say that I'm on par with some of the big fish in the pond, but 10 months later, 11 months later, I have some name recognition. Like the fellow that I spoke to this morning, he's a longtime friend of Zig Kanstul. And I emailed him, I guess a couple of weeks ago about the interview. And he said, of course I'm familiar with your work. I'd be honored to be on your podcast. Yeah. So it's just, it's a cornerstone. It's not going, like the podcast by itself isn't going to make me rich, but it will open, I guess another analogy that I think of is like a shopping mall. You have Bloomingdale's, Macy's, Sears as the anchor stores, right? Then you have all these other little stores within the mall. The podcast is like the anchor store in the mall.
I like that analogy. That's a great analogy. I'll have to use that. I'll credit you, but I need to use.
Well,
that.
I own the copyright on it, so 50 cents a year.
Okay.
Yours.
Okay. Ray Edwards, $100. You might listen. Yeah. Sorry, folks, listen. This is, we're going to go real deep. Like James and I we're the only two people listening to this that understood that joke, but you did get it. Well, it's interesting, the name recognition thing and how powerful that's been for me, right? Because similar thing, like I was a successful freelancer in Chicago, but that's what I was, right? Like maybe if you played bass in Chicago or maybe if you played in an orchestra with, you'd know my name, and that's it. And I never set out. That was not my goal with starting the podcast, but very quickly I became, and again, this not to sound egotistical, pompous, but truly, I'm probably one of the best known double bass players there is.
Because of your podcast.
Because of the podcast. I go overseas and I'm the name that people know. I'm the guy. In fact, I was at a bass festival in Prague in September, and a friend of mine, Jeff Chalmers, runs Discover Double Bass, and he and we were hanging out, and someone walked by and pointed at us, and he said, "Look, it's the internet." But it's true. Like we have such a footprint, and when you have an audience, when you have a platform, there are opportunities to generate revenue, and so. Something I'm also asked, I was just down at Colburn in Los Angeles, the Colburn School of Music, talking with some students, and one of the questions came up was, how do you make money with a blog or a podcast? And I'm happy to tell my answer, but what would you, if someone asked you that question, what would you say?
Well, I'm in the process of discovering that right now, because I'm only less than a year into it, and this podcast hasn't made me any money. I'm just going to be frank with you. But the way that you make money with a blog or a podcast is you provide something of value, and you get people interested in you as an individual. Like my goal from day one has always been put out a great product. That people will consume. They'll consume it for free, because that's the world we live in. And you can't complain about free. You just have to accept the way it is, and you have to find a way to exist within that framework. But I guess I can make an announcement now, but something that I'm looking to do is sort of create sort of a membership site on my website. And one of the perks of the membership would be some of the bonus content, like Richard Cox and I are talking about, an audio series on the psychological effects or the psychology of music. Other people have expressed a desire to use the podcast to promote their products, and so that might be some bonus content available, as well as using my website to promote themselves. Like a lot of musicians, a website is a huge pain in the you-know-what. You have to find a web host. You have to get a domain name. You have to find a theme on WordPress. You have to learn WordPress. You have to install WordPress. And you go to the average musician's website, and it looks kind of lame,
Right. Yes.
like the average freelancer in wherever, and it's just they just don't need a full website.
Yeah.
Like I'm thinking, and I've got a lot of good feedback on this from players I've talked to, trumpet players, is one page.
Yes.
On my website, you can put your bio, you can put YouTubes of you, you can have contact information, you can have everything that you need as a freelancer, and you can have a web presence. And I take care of all of the technical gobbledygook that goes with having a website.
Yeah.
For a small fee. And the way that you get interested in that is you put out a great product on the podcast.
Yeah.
It's all about putting out a good product. Like John Lee Dumas will tell you, the first priority is just put out good content. Number one priority.
Yeah. Yeah. And then people respond, and you listen to those people, and you and find way to add value.
You find their pain points.
Yeah, right. I mean, all business is listening and finding a way to add value to the lives of other people.
You find that thing that's driving them crazy, that they know they need and they can't provide. What can I do? To make your life better? That's entrepreneurship.
And it's interesting, and that's why I'm so glad we're talking, because these are the sort of things I think about generally by myself while I'm on a walk or in my place working and stuff. And it's such a creative way to be in this world, but if you're not careful, it can be a very isolating kind of experience. Like I sit here in my place in San Francisco trying to figure out what the next move is, right? And how do you deal with that? Because that's a real different thing than what most musicians are used to, or especially classical musicians. Hey, I play in the orchestra. I'm part of the brass section. We have this, we hate the conductor. We can gab. Then you're doing this thing that's really creative, and there are no hard and fast rules, but there are two sides to that coin, right? You can really feel like you're twisting in the wind, not sure what direction to go. Like, how do you ground yourself and get direction doing what you do?
Honestly, there are times where I just wake up in the morning. I'm like, what am I going to do today?
Yeah.
I mean, it's you don't have that. A job is kind of a pain in the neck, but you've got that stability. Yeah. You don't necessarily like to do it, but at least you have something to do that day.
Yes.
And my existence is I'll wake up and I'm like, what am I going to do today?
And that's a beautiful thing, but there's the other side to it too. Yeah.
It's beautiful and it's scary, and it's my wife isn't a fan of it, but that's the road I've chosen. But I guess to answer your question, it's just you have to have the big picture in mind. Like my big picture isn't just what am I going to edit today, or who am I going to talk to today? What is my success look like a year from now, 2 years from now? And that's for me, I don't know if this answers your question, but it's just you keep your eye on the big picture, on that destination on the map.
Yeah. Well, somebody, and this is another one of these super rabbit holes that maybe only you and I know what the reference is, but there's an author I love named James Altucher, Jim Altucher.
Yes.
He wrote a great book called Choose Yourself, and
absolutely,
which is sort of like a manifesto for the era we live in. And I just, okay, cool. I'm glad you, and so something he talks about that I've really embraced is just becoming an idea generating machine. Like the idea of creating ideas, just coming up with 10 ideas in a day. And
do you do that?
I have started to do that after reading the book. I'm not as formal. I don't know how formal he is, but I don't necessarily write all 10 of them down, but I go out for a run pretty much every morning, and that kind of gets my body going. It kind of gets the juices flowing and my brain going. And then I usually listen to podcasts and that sort of thing. And then I get done running and I turn off the podcasts and I just walk for a while. And that's when the ideas come. And I have my iPhone with me and I have Evernote. and I'll write them down. And 80% of the time, I don't ever do anything with them, right? But I just wrote this book. It's coming out this week. It'll be after that when you folks are listening, but called Winning the Audition. And my idea for that book came from one of those runs. And the idea was, and it's kind of the plight of the podcaster. We have this audience and we do this show and we have people that follow along. But as we put out more content, everything almost becomes kind of blurrier in a way because you have so many points of view and so many dialogues. And I realized that I could offer value by shaping and distilling that content. And it's very similar to what Tim Ferriss is doing with his Tools of the Titans book that's coming out now, which is basically what he's learned talking to all these people. Now, I'm proud to say I thought of that idea before I saw that Tim did it, although I'm sure he had already thought of it before, right? But I moved out to San Francisco, and at this point, I'd done about 230 podcasts. So for 2 or 3 weeks, all I did was I woke up, made coffee, sat down and listened to everything I'd ever recorded, which I never want to do ever again in my life, right? It was not the most interesting few weeks listening to myself talk, right? But I had an Evernote document open and I would write down the timestamp when we talked about something that I think I could synthesize, whether it was a technical concept, a mindset thing, and auditions were something that came up over and over again. And I came up with a list of about 35 topics that came up again and again, and I have time-stamped when somebody talked about that topic with a little note. And I started to create this outline of ways I could shape this into more sharper focused content. And so the Winning the Audition was the first idea, and I made it a podcast series first. I just took them all and I put out like a highlight reel of the topic of auditioning. And then I took all that and I turned it into this book. And the response has been great. It's actually really, but I had no idea that a book would result in that. I had no idea I'd start with auditioning. I have no idea in 2 weeks, like what the response has been tremendous. And everybody that I featured on it has responded with just enthusiastic praise for the project. And so, but I could never have predicted that that's what I'd be doing. Like 3 months ago, if you'd asked me, I never would have thought, oh, I'm going to write a book on auditioning. I didn't have that in mind. I'm not like a particularly amazing auditioner. Like I'm not really, but I have through that role, like what we both do, I have been somebody who's like listening and thinking about this. And for me, having that entrepreneurial path gives me the time, if I so choose it, to really synthesize that. Everybody's life is so busy, they don't have the time to do that. Even though somebody could sit down and listen to all my podcasts and do that, it's such a Herculean task, right? So that's a way that I've found to add value, and I'm super excited to kind of chase that and go. I have ideas for more projects along those lines. So that's something I've found. And I'd be fascinated as other music podcasters get out more content if they do that. I mean, the advantage I had is I had 10 years of content. So yes. I was with every major, quote unquote, major person in the classical music world, at least. So that's something I found. But also, folks listening, like I've started to look at even like my bass teaching almost as like client work. And if you think of it that way, it really ties in well to like the entrepreneurial path. Not that all my students come from the podcast, but I am getting a higher quality of student from the podcast. As soon as I landed here in San Francisco, all of a sudden I'm getting all these requests from people that I most certainly would not have been getting requests from if I just moved here as a regular freelancer. Yeah.
Wow. Well, have you read .com Secrets?
No, but I'm going to write that down.
Russell Brunson, .com Secrets.
Okay.
Phenomenal book. Cool. On the ins and outs of, that's basically how you do it with internet marketing. Like you look at all the emails that you get, the Facebook ads, of course they want your email address, but .com Secrets is a great, it's all about funnels, funneling people into your business.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's something that I have started to, I've started to become fascinated by the whole marketing and funneling and honing my message for the web and for the Facebook and for this overwhelm of information world that we live in. And that's actually been really interesting. As an artist, because we're both artists, right? I have that. I think I've gotten over it for the most part, but I have that like punk rock kind of aesthetic. It's like, I don't want to learn how to do that stuff, man. My art's my art, and I'm going to present it however I want to, take it or leave it. But I think when you start to work on those skills, you're just really learning how to become a better communicator in the world we live in. So that, at least that's how I've actually become really interested in all of that. Like if we compared our podcast lists, they'd probably be pretty similar. Like Fizzle Show and Copy Blogger, and I listen to all Pat Flynn, Smart Passive Income, and all of these shows. And you actually had Pat on your podcast, didn't you?
I did.
Yeah.
Yes, that was an unexpected surprise to meet him at Podcast Movement in Chicago this past July. And of course, Pat Flynn is, of course, one of the great. He's way up there, the biggest, way up on the totem pole. So I wanted to meet him. Struck up a little conversation, and I told him the name of my podcast, Trumpet Dynamics. He says, "Oh, I play trumpet. Yeah. I love trumpet.
Yep.
In fact, trumpet is like, if I wasn't doing this, I'd be playing trumpet." I'm like, wow.
Yeah. It's a great episode. I'll link up to that. I was listening to that episode in Prague. I remember I was like,
really?
Yeah, brushing my teeth, and I'm like looking through my pockets. And I'm like, Pat Flynn on James's podcast. What? So, but it was great. He's totally, like he was like a band geek in high school. I mean,
he was. And it's like some of these guys, they're like, oh yeah, I played trumpet when I was like 3, and I just quit, and there's just no enthusiasm. And this guy was really excited about it. In fact, he still has a trumpet. He doesn't play it, but he still has it. It's like, it was really a unexpected surprise and very welcome. It's a Pat Flynn is somebody worth, especially if you're interested in what James and I are talking about, absolutely worth listening to. Great podcast. And there's somebody who, I mean, it's high quality, and I love Pat and what he does and how he delivers his message in his show, and he's friendly and conversational and just really that's the way he is in real life. He is who he is behind the mic.
Yeah. And he's just had such success through this. Smart Passive Income is the name of his podcast and blog. It'd be interesting to just like, okay, so MusicPreneur launching 2017, beginning of 2017.
January 1st.
January 1st, 2017. Awesome.
I'm already blogging. I post to the blog every single day.
Yeah.
MusicPreneur.com.
Yeah. What's the, and again, these visions change over time, but like what's the launch vision right now, just in terms of what's coming out? Like a weekly, how many episodes? Just maybe
it'll be 3 per week. The initial vision, I guess, it would be the first episode of the week would be Sunday or Monday. I don't know. I'm thinking Sunday, because people who go to jobs, they listen to podcasts on Monday. Yeah. And I want to promote like sort of a different mindset. You listen to an entrepreneurship podcast on Sunday. You get people out of that mindset of, I'm driving to my job on Monday, so I listen to a podcast. Get them out of that mental rut. Break up the monotony of their mind a little bit. So why not really? I haven't made up my mind, but either way, the first episode of the week will be an in-depth interview hopefully with a musician. If there's a non-musician who's like on top of the entrepreneurship world, like if John Lee Dumas says he'll do an interview, of course I'm gonna have John Lee Dumas. But I want people who have made it happen, who get it. They get the concept of there's nothing wrong with money. Money is not evil. The love of money is evil. But money is just a sign of it's a validation of your efforts as a musician. There's nothing unholy about taking money for music, for your work. They get that the product of music isn't just music, but it's the experience that you create with music. Right. That I just want people who understand that and have made it happen And in spite of my failings as a host and as a musicpreneur myself, a developing musicpreneur, hopefully I can get people who have been there, done that, and can inspire others to do the same.
Cool. Yeah, I can't wait. I love, because I like talking about this sort of thing on my show, but with my audience, the issue I have is I talk to bass players predominantly, right?
Yeah.
But we don't really necessarily talk that much about bass. We're really talking about life and mindset and like what we're talking about. But it's contra-bass conversations. It's a bass show, and I'm not gonna like not cater to that audience. And I'm a bass player, and so I'm so excited to check out who you're featuring and what you're featuring, because it's a topic of great interest to me, and it's something that I love to feature on my own podcast, but I try to be sensitive to maybe like once in a while have something. Or I had a week earlier this year where I've been doing these thematic weeks. So I had Entrepreneur Week. I took 5 people, 4 of the 5 are bass players, and that are doing something off the beaten path and killing it. And I like doing that sort of thing, but I can't wait to check out how the podcast develops. It's exciting.
Well, it's been a long time in coming. I first had the idea for it when I met with John in Puerto Rico in June. Mm-hmm. And so it's about 6 months in the making. So I'll be ready to get it out there.
So you did this joke show recently, which I love, and I've been seeing people doing different things. Like Sean Perrin, who hosts the Clarinet podcast, he did like a Halloween show, which was super fun. Garrett Hope, who hosts the Portfolio Composer, he did a call-in show that I really liked, just talking to different people that listen to the podcast. And I've got an anniversary. I've got the 10th anniversary of my podcast. January 1st, 2017, when you launch your podcast, that's 10 years of this podcast.
Oh, my goodness.
What the heck should I do for my 10th year anniversary? Do you have any ideas? I've been mulling it over, and I just cannot.
Yep. I'm writing 10 ideas right now.
Okay. Nice. I mean, I want to try to do maybe a live event or something like that. But the problem with that is then we're limited to San Francisco or something around here, which could still be fun.
Do Facebook Live.
Yeah. I need to do something like that. I got it.
There's a way to do Facebook Live on your computer. Mm-hmm. Let me look it up for you right now. Facebook Live. You have a Mac, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's see here. You know what? Michael O'Neill, I asked him this, and he answered it. And he does every Friday. He does a free coaching Friday.
Okay.
And he does it live on Facebook, and then he records it, high quality. He puts it on his podcast. So I'll ask him.
Okay, cool.
So that might be something you want to consider.
Yeah, because I would love to include people obviously outside of San Francisco. I mean, we'd have a good hang, but okay, cool. That's because
your audience is way outside of San Francisco, so you want to be as inclusive as possible.
Yes, I get
Facebook Live is the way to go.
Well, and that's the beauty of this podcasting thing we do, right? You've probably gotten these kind of messages, but like I get these emails from people. I got this email. The guy says, "I've been listening to your podcast for years. I am working in rural Kazakhstan," which I'm not sure if there's an urban Kazakhstan, but he's rural, right? I listen to your podcast as I'm driving this truck around the steppes of Kazakhstan. And he said, "I remembered when your podcast first came out, I was listening to it in the jungles of Indonesia, working. It was like the most amazing, like." And people that I drive a truck in Pennsylvania, like lots of people doing long haul things that write in. Or some people say, I listen to your podcast as I'm playing long tones and warming up. And it's just a good way to like get inspired and get into the groove. And it really is remarkable, isn't it? Like the reach you can have with this kind of thing. Absolutely.
Oh, I was just looking at my stats this morning, and it's like, I have like 500 people in China who have listened to my podcast in the last 30 days. It's crazy.
It's crazy. My favorite, I had Libya. I would love Libya, and then some places in Africa. And I put the request out. I have not gotten a response, but like, if you're from there, I'd love to hear from you. And did you not just do an episode where you talked to a couple people in Africa?
Yes.
Yeah, I love that. I was listening to that when I was in LA a couple days ago, and I'm just super fascinated by what you're doing. Like, that was a great idea. What'd you made you think of that?
That's just you just have to have an open mind. And let me tell the story. I'm always looking for interesting takes, trumpet players. I'm not always looking for the big fish in the pond. Mm-hmm. I'm looking for people who can contribute something interesting. And I've had big name, world-renowned players on the show. I've had dentists who specialize with musicians. Mm-hmm. I've had 9-year-old girls who just started playing the trumpet like 3 months prior to the interview. And so I saw a friend request from a couple of guys in Africa. They're fairly young, early 20s. And I was just, and the purpose of the interview was to just talk about trumpet with a guy in Africa. Mm-hmm. That was the purpose of it. Mm-hmm. But as I got into the interview, I just sensed this real, just a longing mm-hmm. for someone to teach jazz. Yeah. Like their experiences in brass band and the marching band, and that's all they teach in the school. But he was just going on and on about how he loves to play jazz, and he just kept on saying, I would love to have someone come to, where is it? Uganda. Yeah. To teach jazz. And so I started asking, so if we were to get a couple of guys who play jazz to go to Mbale, I think is the name of the town, you think people would show up for a clinic on jazz? He said, oh, absolutely. And so I thought, this is the entrepreneur in me, says, I don't know what can happen, but with modern fundraising things on the internet, GoFundMe, Kickstarter, I mean, let's just put it out there. And I just said, if this sounds interesting to you, just send me an email and let's see what happens. Yeah. And it could be that no one has any interest. It could be that 5 people step forward and say, I'll go to Uganda. Mm-hmm. But it's just, that's just entrepreneurship. Again, you just find a need. And I just sensed just a real deep longing for that. Yeah. And so who knows? Yeah. So using the podcast to get the word out.
Well, I love you just got really great ideas for this medium, and one thing I love about the medium is just how flexible it is, and how you can I've been really digging all these different directions that you go, and the Entrepreneur Fridays that you've been doing on the Trumpet Podcast, and I'm super pumped for the launch of MusicPreneur. I just have to get better at spelling it.
I've had MusicPreneur. I've had it's hard. It's hard. Yeah. So we'll just have to educate people.
Cool, man. Thanks again, James. Pleasure. Look forward to following on with what you're up to online. Love the energy. Love the ideas. Trumpet Dynamics and MusicPreneur. We got links to those in the show notes. Thanks again for following along, folks. I love coming up with these different thematic episodes and these different thematic weeks. This week, I'm putting out this interview with James. I'm also putting out an interview with Tracy Friedlander, who started a podcast called Crushing Classical. We featured Chris Hanulik and then Caleb Quillen last week, so kind of more in the orchestral audition world. I love mixing it up like that. I hope you're enjoying following along on this journey. If you don't subscribe to the podcast, why have you not subscribed yet? No, just kidding. But check it out go to contrabassconversations.com/subscribe. You can get it through iTunes, you can get it through Google Play, you can get the app, you can get on our email list, which, by the way, if you get on the email list, I provide stuff that you don't get on the podcast or online. Bass News of the Week. I put together a special double bass Spotify playlist every week, send it out to the people that follow along. So get on that list if you're not yet. And if you'd like to support the show in any way, I would be so thrilled. There are lots of ways you can do it, and they're all listed at contrabassconversations.com/support. So that's going to do it for another episode, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.